Hello students, welcome to the session on stereotypic attitudes related to visual impairment and attitude modification. According to Alport, an attitude is a mental and neural state of readiness organized through experience, exerting a directive and dynamic influence upon the individual's response to all objects and situations with which it is related. Kupuswamy described that an attitude is a predisposition to react favorably or unfavorably toward ideas, objects, persons, events and situations. An individual develops certain kind of attitude from his previous experiences in favor of or against a particular idea, person and object. An attitude is not innate, but it is learned. It persists relatively for a long period of time. It also motivates the individual to act, helping to shape and direct his behavior. Attitudes range from acceptance to rejection and feelings of guilt. Attitudes of parents are perhaps the most important element in the proper development of the child. Among the different factors which complicate the satisfactory development of blind children are parental attitudes both towards themselves and their blind children. The comments of one person towards somebody or something may influence another person to develop favorable or unfavorable attitudes towards that object. Malin and Birch categorized attitudes into three component parts. They are cognitive, affective and behavior or cognitive. Cognitive is the one which includes perceptions of objects and events or reports or beliefs about them. Affective is the one which includes feelings about and emotional response to objects and events. Behavior or cognitive refers intentions and predicts the way in which an individual may behave in relation to an object or events. Rajaki described that it is difficult to measure attitude by separating into these three components. Cognitive, affective and behavioral responses are often not empirically distinguishable as three classes. Now, let us see the perception of parents towards disability. It is known that the family is the main building block of any development process. It is the center of a child's experience and the structure through which most learning takes place. Many parents show a wide range of feelings towards their visually impaired child. Different studies noted that the attitudes of parents are perhaps the most important element in the proper development of the child. When parents realize that their children have disabilities, they show different reactions such as shock, denial, anger, bitterness and shame, loss of self-esteem, guilt, disappointment, sadness and grief. All these reactions have their own impact on the overall development of the child. According to Warren and Trachtenberg, the perception of parents towards disability in general and blindness in particular affects the type of treatment and way of handling their child with a disability. Jordan, Gallagher, Hettinger and Carnes cited that one of the major forces that influence a child with a disability is the family. In order to be effective in special education, it is essential to work with the family system in which the child lives, not just only with a child. Parents are the child's first and the most important teachers. They can be his or her first guide to favorable emotional and social adjustment, as well as the guardians of his or her physical well-being. When parents first realized that the child has a disability, their hopes are crushed. Sommer distinguished 4 types of parental attitudes towards blindness. Viewing the child's blindness as a form of punishment, fearing that others would think that the child's blindness was a result of parents having a social disease, feeling guilty because negligence or having violated some moral or social code, feeling personally disgraced. The relationship between the blind child and the family is reciprocal. The child affects the family climate, while the family in turn affects the child's development. Now, let us discuss on attitude of parents towards their blind or visually impaired children. Among the different factors which complicate the satisfactory development of blind children are parental attitudes both towards themselves and their blind children. Attitudes in general range from acceptance to the other extreme of rejection and feelings of guilt. It is undeniable that positive attitude of parents is perhaps the most important element in the child's environment. By substantiating this, Lowenfeld pointed out that the attitude of parents are more critical to a blind child's development than the particular child rearing techniques they employed. There are different factors which affect the attitude of parents towards their blind children, such as the attitude of the society towards disability in general and blindness in particular, religion, culture, superstitious beliefs. Concerning religion, it is difficult to say followers of some religion accept persons with disabilities and followers of other reject them. Even in recent past, though the scenario is being changed, some parents of disabled people were afraid of being laughed at and isolated by the society. Hence, they often kept them indoors and made no efforts to develop them for their future lives. Many parents show a wide range of feelings and practices when they realize that their child has any disability. They nearly always react strongly, whether positively or negatively, to the birth of a child with disabilities. Furthermore, Ware showed that the birth of the blind infant can change the parents' basic system of values, beliefs and trust, as well as the sense of control over their own lives. How parents respond to the situation will depend on their strengths and weaknesses, the help given by other family members, professionals and other factors like severity of the problem, socio-economic status and the availability of the time. There are different ideas held by scholars about the reaction of parents with different socio-economic status towards the birth of a child with a disability. Farrell states that the higher the socio-economic status of the family, the more adverse the reaction to the birth of a disabled child. In the same reference, higher educational level in parents do not necessarily guarantee positive attitudes towards persons with disabilities. Either college graduates are just likely to have been exposed to and to sustain common myths about blindness. Differences in family attitudes, actions and support result in variations in how children with special needs adjust to education or cope with their special education. Hence, it is necessary to understand what has happened to them in their family life before they entered school, or even what is happening in their life now beyond the school environment. In order to accept a child with a disability in general, parents show different reactions. According to Trachtenberg, the process of acceptance includes the stages such as denial and isolation, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. Now, let us see one by one. Denial and isolation. This stage can give momentary escape for the parent from feelings of guilt and shock. At this stage, parents deny the presence of disability. According to Garwood, denial has two counterproductive consequences for the child's development. That is, parents may become overprotective, keeping their child put off situation that would help in the normalization process. On the other hand, parent may out excessive pressure for achievement on the child, leading to frustration for both the child and the parents. This will also result emotional problem for the child. Anger. It can be directed toward anyone and anything. Many parents feel angry and search for someone or something to blame. Often the anger is directed at God and or at the whole world. They may ask, why this did happen to my child and me? Anger also may be self-directed. Next is bargaining. It is characterized by a search for cure. Regarding depression, during this stage, the disability has begun to have its full impact on the family. Family members typically may show symptoms like extreme fatigue, insomnia, loss of appetite, or overeating, restless and irritability. Regarding acceptance, parents see their child as an individual with his or her own strengths and weaknesses. How will individuals ultimately adjust to their child's disability depends on marital status, support systems and previous life experience. Strong religious affiliation and effective behavior interventions in the home are also associated with early acceptance. Parents who have previous experience in rearing a child with disabilities can easily accept the newborn infant with a disability. It is clear that many parents of children with disabilities pass through similar reactions and emotional responses to reach the stage of acceptance. But the time varies from parent to parent. For some parents, years may pass, and for some, it may take few months or days. Mitchell described that even if parents reach the acceptance or adaptation stage, the child is treated as much as possible as just another member of the family, which does not revolve around him or her. The parents may always experience some sadness that their child has a disability, but this does not interfere with their efforts to make the best out of life. Now, let us see the attitude of community towards blindness. Blindness evokes different emotional reactions in different persons. The reactions, however, vary from community to community depending on its tradition, culture, religion and belief. The societies across the globe have developed their own images of visually impaired people, their capabilities and limitations. Now, let us discuss in detail about each aspects. Culture and beliefs. The way people treat disabled person differs from family to family, community to community and country to country. It is related with the culture of the society. This means the culture of the society has an impact on the attitude of that society towards persons with disabilities, which in turn affect their way of treatment. The presence of different ethnic culture beliefs regarding the cause for disability, such as curse from God, breaking laws and family sins, offences against gods, witches and wizards, adultery, misfortune, God's representatives, misdeed in a previous life, illegal or unapproved marriage, shows the omnipotence of God, evil spirit, killing certain forbidden animals, a warning from God, and fighting elders during harvest. Werner also described that in some part of the world, people think a child is blind as a punishment for something the parents have done. According to him, in Latin America, villagers believe that blindness occurs when a bat's urine fell in the baby's eyes or a black witch moth flew by the baby's face. Generally, the beliefs held by different cultural groups determine the degree of acceptance or rejection of persons with disabilities in that society. Religion. Different studies have indicated that religion has a powerful role in influencing the attitude of persons with disabilities. Barker Tirsu stated that in Greek, the Christian doctrine introduced the view that the disabling disease is neither a disgrace nor a punishment for sin, instead a means of purification and a way of grace. This ideology shows suffering perfects the sufferer. The sick has a preferential position and it is a privilege for the healthy to minister them. Next we will see metamorphic expression. The terms used by the society, the mass media, newspaper to address different types of disabilities and persons with disabilities have an effect on the development of either positive or negative attitude towards disability. The mass media even today portray persons with disabilities in stereotypic and inaccurate ways. This creates negative attitude for non-disabled person towards persons with disabilities and in turn creates low self-esteem for disabled persons. Let us see the societal attitude in ancient time. According to different scholars, societal attitudes are one of the main barriers or handicaps to the development of persons with disabilities. Societal attitudes show a person with a disability as a burden, dependent and an object of pity. These attitudes have a great negative impact on the development of the disabled people. Macha stated that the societal responses towards persons with disabilities are determined by two valuable but interrelated factors. These are the mode of production and the central value system. During the previous time, it was believed that people with disabilities were a curse from the gods and deliberate actions was taken to destroy their lives. Even today, there are different beliefs held by the society about blindness and blind people. Hallahan and Kaufman described that in ancient times, blindness was considered as a punishment for sins, either one's own or one's ancestors. Certain communities used to kill a disabled child as a community dependent on skills of man for its survival could not accord a place to a disabled child. As the society progressed towards a welfare state, changes occurred in the total outlook. The visually impaired person became member of the society who needed to be looked after but not at par with others. They were to live on charity. It has also an undertone of religious belief. Today, the scenario is changing. The community is based on the principles of equality and fraternity. Now, we will see the stereotypic attitudes towards persons with visual impairment. Stereotype is a mixture of fact and fiction. Blind persons are compensated by being gifted in some skill or art. They are exceptionally talented. The blind's other senses are more sensitive. The fact is that they learn to make discrimination in the sensation which they receive by paying more attention and concentration. Blind people have superior musical ability. Since they cannot see, they concentrate on every sound more than their sighted counterparts. They are helpless and burden on the society. If partially blind use their sight too much, then they lose their remaining sight. Monbeck describes the various historically based stereotypic attitudes towards the blind which exist today. The blind deserve pity and sympathy, and this must be based on our religious ideals of society. The blind area is a miserable group. Blindness and blind people are very seldom treated humorously in literature, but there is an abundance of description of the misery of the blind. Thus, a quotation from Diderot, "Certainly death is a much less disagreeable affair than for the sighted." People who are blind live in a world of darkness. People who are blind are a helpless group, grouping, stumbling and unable to find their way. People who are blind are useless and non-productive. Attitudes to the blind have been shaped by the blind beggars who have a long history. The blind are compensated for the lack of sight by the sharpening of other senses. The blind are being feared, avoided and rejected. In the ancient world, infanticide of the blind was common. Some cultures merely shunned the blind, others persecuted them. The blind are maladjusted. The blind are immoral and evil. The blind are superior to sighted people and idealization. The blind are associated with mystery, with magic and with supernatural powers. Disability, particularly congenital disability, has traditionally been regarded as a cause for shame. It is not just a financial burden for the family, spoiling other aspects of the family, including the marriage prospects of siblings. For this reason, it has in the past been quite common, particularly in rural areas, for disabled children to be kept out of sight, in some cases locked away in a room while parents were out working. According to Siller, there are 7 factors which are found to be aversive attitudes towards disabled. Interaction strain, that is distinct uneasiness in the presence of disabled persons. The second one is rejection of intimacy, that is unwillingness to have close relationship even from family members. The third is generalized rejection. Derogatory descriptions advocate for segregation. The fourth one is authoritarian virtuousness. Describes the disabled person as having special gifts and personal traits. The fifth one is inferred emotional consequences. Hostile statements about disabled person, maladjustment, ill temper, hypersensitivity, bitterness, self-pity. The sixth is distressed identification. Disabled person serves as a stimulus. The seventh one, imputed functional limitations, unable to do functions or certain professions. Siller, in another research, gives 3 non-aversive attitudes. benevolent attitudes, that is ranging from neutral to undue favors, sympathy, that is wishing to alleviate the sufferings of the disabled, disabled seen as human or equal, recognition that they right for equality in all respects as they are enjoyed with their counterparts. Now, let us see contemporary attitude. In modern history, medical findings have provided us with some causes of disability, while educational researchers are also finding new ways of teaching children with the different forms of disabilities. On the other hand, modern thinking is increasingly arguing that disability is a social construct, not a medical construct. However, some causes still remain unknown, but generally new findings will eventually replace the traditional views of the causes of disabilities. In societies where large majority of people are illiterate, it will take a long time to understand and accept medical research findings regarding the causes of different disabilities. Finally, let us see attitude modification. The survival of handicapped newborn is a complex issue. Whether considered from the perspective of a professional or parents, resolution of the problem is no easy matter. No matter where one stands on the issue, one should agree and for disabled people themselves. In the past, divisions regarding the treatment were made on the almost automatic assumption that defective babies were destined to lead meaningless lives. Changing the negative attitudes of a society is not done easily or quickly, but the parents' conferences, primary integration programs and presentations at professional conferences are gradually converting individuals from having negative attitudes to the disabled to having positive attitudes. From here, the ripples gradually spread, and at least in our own locality, we are seeing the growth of positive attitudes. Attitudes towards disability now appear to be changing, especially in urban areas. Relevant factors include greater expectations for improved quality of life generally, increased demand for services from parents of disabled children, and the gradual release of private initiative in provision of services. Changes in attitude may be the result of rational influence of experiences and also of emotions that have a counteracting effect. Well presented information, learning to know an individual who belongs to a minority may produce change in attitude. There are many misconceptions about persons with visual impairment. Myth: people who are legally blind have no sight at all. But the fact is, only a small percentage of those who are legally blind have absolutely no vision. Many have a useful amount of functional vision. Myth: people who are blind have an extra sense that enables them to detect obstacles. No, but the fact is, people who are blind do not have an extra sense. Some can develop an obstacle sense by noting the change in pitch of the echoes as they move toward objects. Myth: people who are blind automatically develop better acuity in their other senses. But the fact is, through concentration and attention, individuals who are blind can learn to make very fine discriminations in the sensations they obtain. This is not automatic, but rather represents a better use received sensations. Myth: people who are blind have superior musical ability. But the fact is, the musical ability of people who are blind is not necessarily better than that of sighted people, but many people who are blind pursue musical careers as one way in which they can achieve success. Myth: Braille is not very useful for the vast majority of people who are blind. It should only be tried as a last resort. Fact, very few people who are blind have learned Braille, primarily due to fear that using Braille is a sign of failure and to an historical professional bias against Braille. Authorities acknowledge the utility of Braille for people who are blind. Myth: Braille is of no value for those who have low vision. But the fact is, some individuals with low vision have conditions that will eventually result in blindness. More and more authorities think that these individuals should learn Braille to be prepared for when they cannot read print effectively. Myth: If people with low vision use their eyes too much, their sight will deteriorate. But the fact is, only rarely is this true. Visual efficiency can actually be improved through training and use. Wearing strong lenses, holding books close to the eyes, and using the eyes often cannot harm vision. Myth: Blind children automatically develop superior powers of concentration that make them good listeners. But the fact is, good listening is primarily a learned skill. Although many visually impaired individuals do develop good listening skills, this is the result of work on their part because they depend on these skills for so much of the information they gain from the environment. Myth: Guide dogs take blind people where they want to go. The fact is, the guide dog does not take the blind person anywhere. The person must know where he or she is going. The dog is primarily a safeguard against unsafe areas or obstacles. Myth: The long cane is a simply constructed device that is easy to use. The fact is, manufacturing agencies have drawn up specifications for the manufacture of the long cane and to use it properly. Most visually impaired individuals require extensive instruction from mobility specialists. I hope this session helps you in understanding stereotypic attitudes related to visual impairment and how attitude modification can be done. Thank you, students.